Hey there, everyone. Simon Walker here. Hi there. We're just setting up, ready for the webinar. We got Jonas with us as well. Hi, Jonas. How you doing?
Hey there. I'm good.
Greetings. Sorry, Jonas. I keep pronouncing this wrong. I pronounce everybody's name incorrectly, so I'm sorry about that.
No, Jonas is good. Jonas is
yes,
actually
it's a soft...
the correct pronunciation.
All right. Okay. On the colorist mixer every IBC, I get to do the raffle and I pronounce everyone's names incorrectly. So I'm used to it.
We had that in the past too.
Excellent. Thanks, Marius. You anticipated my question. Hi, Celio. Hi, Simon. So thank you for letting us know. You can hear us and see the screen and stuff. This is great. And where are we? 2 minutes to go. We've got a whole bunch of people joined us already. Hello, welcome everyone. Well, I'll give you the official intro speech in a second, but just before I do that, yes, we're recording this, and we'll tell you how to get the links as well. We're recording it, and we're providing the project files. Those are the top two questions we always get. And hi, Stephen. Hi from Toronto. I happen to be in Portland, in Oregon, and Jonas is in Germany. Which city are you in again, Jonas?
Sorry?
Which city are you in again in Germany?
It is Coburg.
Coburg, that's right, yes.
Small town.
Small town, excellent.
Yeah, very beautiful.
Great, and we've also got Darren as well, who's helping out on the questions area. So as we go through, please feel free to ask questions and we'll answer them as we go through, and then also have a Q&A session at the end as well. So we've officially, I'm Simon Walker. I'm the Director of Training for Maxon and for Red Giant, and we're delighted to welcome Jonas, who's also from Maxon. Hi, Jonas. Thank you for joining us. I'm using both your name pronunciations at the moment.
That's okay.
One to the other. Great. And Jonas is supremely talented and very well experienced in Cinema 4D, and so he's sharing with us some fantastic tips for doing stuff quickly, especially with Mograph and making text and so on. But I was just going to say that on screen here, I'm sharing a PDF which lists out all these sessions that we're doing this week. And this PDF is also available to you right now, because if you go into the handout section of the webinar software, you can see a link to the workshop for Mograph designers, and then you get the links to all the sessions this week. So if you haven't yet registered for tomorrow's sessions and also Thursday's sessions, please do. And by registering, you automatically get a link to the recording when it's finished. And we'll send you an email with that recording, that uses the email address that you register with. And the other interesting thing is that if you missed, say, for example, this morning's session, which this is a repeat of it now, but if you wanted to watch that, you can just click on that registration link, click on the date here, and that will take you through to the recording as well. So there's a way of watching recordings of sessions that you didn't register for as well. And also at the bottom of this PDF is a link to my email address, simon@redgiant.com. So if you've got any follow-up questions or you want to ask anything about future sessions perhaps that we might want to do, or if you've got recommendations for those, please let me know. Great. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to you, Jonas.
Right.
And let's see if I could change my presenter. Put it over to you. Here we go. Then we'll see your screen.
Yes. All right. Can you see my screen?
I can, yes. And if everyone wouldn't mind just giving us a quick little message or say hi on the text message, see if you can hear it. Thanks, Celio. Thanks, Brad, Marius, Richard, Stephen. Excellent. Scott, thank you. It's all working. Great. So I'll leave it over to you. And everyone, if you've got any questions, please type them in the questions box and we'll answer as much as we can. And I'll try not to interrupt you, Jonas.
Okay, good. Yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Jonas Pilz. I work for Maxon, as Simon already said. And yeah, today we're gonna, well, break some limits to make a literal statement here. yeah, we're gonna create a text animation, and we will break it and add some dynamics to it, and then we will pimp the rendering later in After Effects. And I'm gonna jump over to QuickTime Player because I want to show you what we're going to create first. So here is the shot, and as you can see, we've got this, well, stone text, but then it breaks from the left to the right, and all of the pieces, all of the fragments, they are moving out, yeah, to the right. So what we have here is some text with some nice bevel that comes a bit out, or that stands a bit out. And this way we can catch some shadows here on the planar parts of the text. And then later for in compositing, I added some more rocks to make the shot a bit more interesting, and also some light streaks and glow and so on, and a nice background. And we will start with the 3D part in Cinema 4D. So let's start from scratch. So here is an empty Cinema 4D scene. And I want to start by creating a text spline. So I go to the splines menu and create a text spline. Here we go, that's the text spline. We will adjust the wording. So we will type in limits, limits. And also what I want to do next is to align it to the middle. And now I want to adjust the font. I want to make it look old, and I thought that a font with serifs might be good for that. So I chose Times New Roman and the bold version of it. Here we go. So that looks much better. And one more thing to make the look here a bit more interesting is to adjust the size of the first and the last letter. Yeah, so to make it a bit bigger. That's something you see really often in title sequences. And I want to do that by going to the kerning options, but instead of unfolding them, I'm just going to show the 3D user interface. So I check that, and this brings up this nice little interface where I can select the letters separately, and then use this gizmo up here. There are a lot of gizmos, but I use this gizmo up here to adjust the size. And I make it a little bit bigger, and then I go to the last one, select this one, and scale it up as well. And here we go. Now I can deactivate the 3D user interface for the kerning, and that's what I want to use as the basis of the text, or for the text. Good. Now the text is selected, and I want to extrude it, and therefore I'm going to use the extrude generator, which is this guy here. But in order to make it apparent immediately, because this is what you need to do in order to extrude the text, I hold down Alt while I create it, and if I click the extrude now, you see that it was automatically created as a parent object for the text, and the text for the spline has been extruded. Right, now we can make this look a little bit more interesting by going to the caps section here. It's already open. And there's something that we added with Cinema 4D Release 21, which is the new caps and bevel options. And with these options, you can create nice roundings on spline objects in the extrude object, for example, but also in other objects. You can see this a little bit better if I bring the shape depth to -100%. And if I now adjust the size parameter, you can see that the cap here stays intact and is adjusted, or will be adjusted in size as I adjust the radius for the rounding here. Okay, so this is very cool. It's a very solid tool, and you can also create very complex bevels here. You can do that on your own, but you can also just load a preset, because this tool comes with a load preset button. And if I click that, you can see the presets that are delivered with Cinema 4D. And the preset I like very much is this one, because it has got this, let's say sharp corner here, then the rounding, and then the sharp corner again. So I just click it and it will be automatically applied. You can see that the bevel shape was automatically set to curve, and also the curve has been set up. This is actually the profile spline that has been used to create this rounding here. All right. So, but what we need is something that goes inwards again, because we want to set some steep lighting so that we can catch some shadows here on the plane areas. And to achieve that, I'm going to right-click into the spline UI here and go down to symmetrize. This is also something that was added with Cinema 4D release 21. So I do that, and you can see that it was now symmetrized. Okay, let's adjust the amount of segments here, because this is, it's so to speak the resolution for the effect. The more you crank that up, the rounder everything will be. And if I zoom in to the T, we have these two lines here, and I want to line them up so that they are just one line, like so. And then I'm going to zoom out here a little bit and orbit around, and then you can see that this part comes out a little bit too much. So I'm going to reduce the shape depth here down to, let's say, 50%. And now I think we're good to go and to continue. All right. So the next thing I want to do is fracturing the whole thing. And therefore, I'm going to select the extrude and go to the Mograph menu, because there is an object that is called Voronoi fracture, and this can be used to break things up. Again, I hold down Alt while I create this object. This will create the object as a parent object of the extrude here. And now you can see that the whole text got very colorful. And this is because that is a visualization of the fragments, or of breaking up the whole text. So what I can do now is, for example, I can go to the sources tab here, and this brings up a list of source objects that are used to create the fracturing pattern here. And if I select the point generator, you see that it actually scatters points in the volume here of the text, and then it creates fragments around these points. So if I increase the point amount, let's say 200, you also see that the count of fragments adjusts. All right, so this is already pretty cool. And the next thing is to add the dynamic simulation. So let me show how fast you can add a dynamic simulation, and even one that makes sense. And therefore, I'm gonna create a floor object and select the floor object as well as the Voronoi fracture, and then I right-click and add a tag. And tags are basically, well, pieces that will enhance the functionality of an object. And in this case, I want to enhance the functionality of the Voronoi fracture object and the floor object by simulation. So I'm going to use the rigid body tag. And now if I hit play, you can already see that the whole thing breaks apart. So it is very easy to create fractured text. But of course, this is not the text or the effect that we wanted to create. What we want to create is some text that is floating somewhere in 3D space, and then it breaks up and all of the pieces are floating towards the right and pushed by wind or a force like that. So in order to achieve that, I'm going to delete the floor object again and just hit play, just to show you that there's some default gravity going on in the scene and everything falls down. And first of all, we need to deactivate this. So I go to Edit, Project Settings, and in the project settings, there is a tab called Dynamics. And in here, there's a parameter called Gravity. And if you bring this down to 0 and press play, you see that it's not falling down anymore. But if we watch closely, you can see that the pieces are moving apart or floating apart. And this is because the simulation is triggered immediately. So what can we do about that? First of all, let's pause the animation and go back to frame 0. And then we will have a look at the rigid body tag here. And in here, there is a tab called Dynamics. And in this tab, you can see a parameter called Trigger, and this is set to immediately. But you can change that, of course. And we will change that to on collision, which means that whenever something collides with these pieces here, the simulation will be triggered. If I hit play now, nothing happens because nothing is colliding with these objects. So what we need is an object to collide with, and I'm going to use a cube for that. Just as simple as that. I'm going to rotate it by 45 degrees. Once you hold down Shift, the rotate tool will snap to 5-degree angles, and then I'm going to go back to the Move tool and hit this button here, because this will switch between the local axis and the world axis, as you can see here. So with the local axis, I can use this gizmo here to move it like in a 45-degree angle. If I switch it to the world axis, I can use this to move along the world x-axis. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this cube here on the left of the text, and then I'm going to right-click and I'm going to create a simulation tag, which is going to be the collider body tag. So we're going to make this a collider. Now we hit play, and once I move this object through the other objects, I can trigger the simulation. Of course, we need a little bit more time here, so I'm going to extend the scene to 250 frames, and I'm also going to double click this bar here to extend it to the full scene, to the full scene length. And now I have a little bit more time to move this object through the text. Okay, let's add some wind next, because actually we want the wind to push the fragments out. So we go to the Simulate menu, and there is a sub-menu called Forces. And when we go down here, we find the wind object. Now let's create this and press play. In the beginning, nothing happens, but as soon as I trigger the dynamics, you can see that all of the pieces are floating to the back, because this is where the wind goes. Okay, the other thing that you see is that when I collide with the objects here, I can really push them towards the right, which means that these objects are really colliding with the cube here. There's also a way to trigger the dynamics on collision, but without really colliding. I don't know if that makes sense if I just explain it, but once I show it to you, it will make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the collider body tag here on the cube, and then there is a parameter called dynamic, and it's set to off, which means that it is detected by dynamics and it's like a collider object, like a floor and something like that. But you can animate it and so on. But If I adjust this and change the parameter to ghost, then let's have a look what happens here. Now I can move the cube through the text, and the simulation will be triggered because it detects a collision, but the fragments don't collide with the cube. And that's what I meant with what I said before. And now what we need to do is to rotate the wind, because it should push all of the fragments to the right. So let's select the wind, use the rotate tool, and just move it by 90 degrees. Again, I hold Shift to make it snap to 90 degrees here. And now if I move the cube here through the L, you can see that the wind pushes all of the fragments to the right. And the good thing is that they crash into the other letters and trigger the animation here, which is really cool. And well, one thing I didn't show in the earlier session is that this whole setup is still 100% procedural. So if I go to the text spline here and just type in cinema, for example, I can play that back and do the very same thing with another piece of text, which is awesome. All right, let's bring that back to limits and continue. So what are we going to do next? We're going to animate this cube from the left to the right, and we will start at frame 0. So let's select the cube, go to the coordinates tab, and set a keyframe for position X. Here we go, just click that circle here. And once it's red, it means you just recorded a keyframe on this frame. And then we go to frame 220 and move the cube to this position and set another keyframe by clicking this little circle. And now, if we play that back, you can see that it already works, but right now it's all obscured by the cube. So what we can do is we can make this cube invisible so that it still triggers the animation or the simulation, and we can do the very same thing with the wind object simply by using the traffic lights here. So these little dots here are the traffic lights, and by using these you can make an object visible or invisible in the viewport as well as in the rendering. The top one is for viewport, the lower one, the bottom one, is for rendering. You can also hold down Alt to just modify both at the same time. And if they are green, this object will always be visible. If they are red, the object will always be invisible. And I will do the same with the cube. And now this is our animation. Already really cool. Okay, now let's set this whole thing up for rendering. And the first thing I want to do so is to apply some materials. But before I do that, I go to the Voronoi fracture object, select it, and in the Object tab, I uncheck Colorize Fragments. And this way I get rid of the random colorization, and I can also see the materials here. Of course, right now there is no material applied, and the first thing we want to add is a concrete material or a stone material. And I can create that from scratch, but this takes too long. Instead, I'm going to go to the content browser here, because the content browser is a very rich library of stuff. And right now, well, there's already the concrete, but let's do another search here for some textures. So we have everything in there. There are objects in there. There are scenes that you can investigate to see how a certain thing was done. But you can also search for materials and for textures and so on. So I type in concrete because I want a concrete texture. Then I scroll down, and here we have a concrete material. And this is actually, well, all of these are concrete materials, but this is the one I want to use in my scene. And if I double click that, you can see that the material was added to the material manager here. And oh, that's my daughter. Good night.
The benefits of working remotely. Excellent.
Yeah, yeah. A little bit of family life in the webinars.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was the smaller one. And I'm actually recording or doing this webinar here in the room of the older one. Yeah, good. Where was I? I just created this concrete material, and I'm gonna apply it. I'm gonna apply it to the extrude object, not to the Voronoi fracture object. And the reason, I will show the reason in a minute. So first of all, I wanna set this up so that the mapping is correct. As you can see here from the front, it looks good, but here on the side, it's very stretched. And this is because by default, it's using UV mapping. But we can use another projection to fix that just with a single click. And we just use the projection parameter here, and we switch from UVW mapping to cubic mapping. And cubic mapping will just project the texture from all sides, or from X, Y, and Z direction onto the object. And this is why it looks good from all sides now. All right, but the thing is that if I play back the animation here, well, maybe I should cache it first. I forgot that. So let's go to the rigid body tag here, go to the cache tab, and just bake the object. It's going to be really fast, but now it will bake down the whole thing. And this also means that we can now scrub through the timeline also backwards, which wasn't possible before because a simulation always needs the frame before the previous frame. But if you bake it, you can just scrub through the timeline. Now let's have a look at this section here, or at this piece. If I scrub through the timeline here, you see that the texture sticks to the object. If I move the material tag here up to the Voronoi fracture object, the fracturing and the simulation are applied first, and after that, the cubic mapping will be applied, which means that the texture will slide on the object. And this is definitely something we don't want, so just use it on the extrude itself. Here we go. Now it sticks to the object again. Right, let's go back to frame 0. And we also need a second material. And the second material is going to be assigned to the insides here. So these are the outside faces, and here we have an inside face. There are a lot of inside faces. We will create a very stylized material for that. I just double click here in the material manager, and I double click the material. And as I said, I will create a very simple material, just a green in the color channel. I'm going to deactivate reflectance, and in the luminance channel, I'm going to apply a bluish color or blue color and bring down the brightness until there is a nice gradient from, well, green to blue. And then I'm going to apply this to the extrude as well. But it doesn't know yet how to restrict that material or the assignment of the material to just the inside faces. But we can use the selection parameter here, the selection link field. But therefore, we need a selection. And we can create that here inside of the Voronoi fracture object. Just go to selections. And here there is a checkbox for inside faces. And once I check that, you see that a polygon selection tag has been added. And if we now select the material tag again, we can drag and drop that selection into this link field here, and then the whole thing will be applied. And then it looks like this. Already pretty awesome. And the next thing I want to add is some light. And I'm gonna use a very simple light setup that just consists of an infinite light and an environment object. So let's first add the infinite light. The infinite light is actually, or this setup is a very quick and dirty one, but it looks good. And for jobs that need to be finished in a very short amount of time, it's awesome because the render times are really incredibly good. So we've got this infinite light, which is something like the sun, a parallel light, and we will adjust the tint, the color tint, a little bit towards orange, and we will also add some area shadow here. And then, because we don't see the shadows in the viewport by default yet, we are going to go to Options and then activate Shadows. So now we also see shadows, and now I can rotate the light, and you see that if I have a steep angle here, that the shadow comes in. And this adds a lot of life here to the planar parts of the letters and make them look way more interesting. Okay, of course, we need to counter that a little bit, and therefore I'm going to create an environment object. I'm going to tint this towards blue. So let's create a color like that. And then I'm going to bring up the environment strength until the color tint here on the letters, well, loses its orangeness. Can you say that? I don't know. I think you know what I mean. But the other cool thing is that this will add some blue tint to the shadows. And this is realistic because shadows outside, if the sun is shining, are not like gray, they are dark blue. Okay, right. So that's basically it. Now we've got some light setup, we've got the animation, and it's ready to render. Almost. Well, let's set up some other things, because later for compositing, I need a material mat for the inside faces as well as for the outside faces. And there are a few ways to do that. One would be going the node-based material way, because node-based materials can output material IDs. But we can also use the take system and do some manual adjustments to, well, have the same result in the end. And I'm going to go that way. And therefore, I'm going to create two more materials, one that is completely red and one that is completely green, because we can pick out these color channels later in compositing. So I double click, and I also double click the material. I'm going to deactivate all material channels except for luminance. I'm going to switch to RGB and bring down everything except for the red channel. Then I'm going to rename this material. R is the new name. And then I'm going to copy this. I hold down Command and drag and drop. And I double click to open it. I call it G. And then I'm going to bring down the red values and gonna bring up green. So now I've got these two new materials. One is 100% red and the other one is 100% green. And now I need to assign these two materials, but in another state of the scene. And now I want to introduce you to the take system that was added with Cinema 4D 17, which is a very powerful tool to create several states of the very same scene with an override concept, and you can also use this for render layers. And this is exactly what I'm going to do now. So let's go to the takes manager, and here we have a main take. The main take is the scene, the default scene, and everything you change here will also be changed in all of the other takes, because as soon as you add a take with this button here, this take will be created as a child of this. So everything that happens in this take, in the main take, will be inherited to all child takes. And this is a concept that even applies if you have a very complex take setup. So because I want this take to be our mat take, I'm gonna call it mat. And now takes work with an override concept, which means that if I want to change something, maybe let's go back to the objects manager and select this material tag, and I want to replace this material here, I cannot do that by default because everything is grayed out. But I can right click the material parameter here. I can right click any parameter actually and go down to override. And this will make this parameter available again. And now I can just drag and drop the red material in here. And this way I can create an override. The other way would be to go to the takes manager and enable auto override. But this is a dangerous one, because once you forget to deactivate this again, you can really mess up scenes. So use it carefully. And well, now I can override anything. So what I will do is I select this guy here, this material, and I override this with my green material. And I'm also going to override the visibility of the environment and the light by using the traffic lights here. And now I'm going to go back to the take manager and disable auto override. This is really important. I can't stress that enough actually. So I'm going to switch that off, and now I can switch between these two. So here I'm in the main take with the lighting applied and the concrete and this stylized material, and then I switch to the other take, and this has got the information for the object IDs in it. Okay, good. One thing we still need to create is a camera, because later I want to add some depth of field. So let's create a camera. Here we can add a camera, and let's also click this little icon here, because this will make us look through that camera. In the object tab, I will adjust the focus distance, but not numerically here. But I will use the focus picker. So I will use this guy here. Just click it once, then click somewhere in the image where you want the focal plane to be. It's now at 837 something. And I'm also going to bring down the f-stop to 1. Good. Now let's switch to physical renderer. So we go to the render settings, open them up, and we go to physical renderer. And physical renderer is a sample-based renderer, which means that you always have got the trade-off between render time and quality. If you want to render for if you need fast render times, you can set down the sampling, but this will result in a lot of noise and a lot of grain. If you want to get rid of the grain, you need to render longer. That's basically the concept. Actually, it's just a quality slider, but the parameters are not called just quality, but there are some other things that you can set up, like sampling subdivisions, but it's still very easy to understand. The first thing I want to change is the sampler. I want to change that to fixed. Although adaptive is a little faster, it creates a slightly blurry image, and fixed creates a very crisp image. That's why I prefer fixed. And the sampling subdivisions, well, they are just a parameter for getting rid of noise. The higher the parameter, or the higher the number here, the less grain you will have in the end. And we need to hire this in the end, this one, the sampling subdivisions, for the whole scene in order to have a clean, or to get a clean depth of field effect. But that means that we can get rid of the multipliers for blurriness subdivisions, shadow subdivisions, ambient occlusion subdivisions, and subsurface scattering subdivisions. Those are the candidates that normally introduce a lot of noise to an image. And I'm also gonna activate depth of field. And now let's hit render to viewport. And here we can see that it renders quite fast, but we don't see any depth of field. Therefore, we have to lower the f-stop. Now we are already at 1, but the cool thing about 3D is that we can go to very unrealistic values. If those existed in reality, nobody could afford this. Right, but let's hit render again. And here, for example, you see that there is a lot of grain, and this is because of the depth of field, also here. Now, if we bring up the sampling subdivisions, let's say to 5, and render again, you see the rendering takes a little bit longer, but we also get rid of the grain. There's still a little bit of grain in there. In the end, I rendered with a value of 9, but then it took like 10 to 15 minutes per frame. And this is why I used Google Sync in the end to render the whole thing. Google Sync is a cloud rendering platform by Google, so you're actually using the Google data center power to render images. And you can go to the extensions menu, and by default, you've got this entry here, Google Sync. You won't have the render with sync entry because you have to install it first, but you can download the whole thing and set up an account. It's very easy to use. If you want to render using sync, just click here. The client application needs to be running. But now this is the window we use to set up the rendering. And here we can just define the take to be rendered. So we've got main and mat. You can define an output path, and I would recommend an absolute path. And you can define the frame range. Let's go from 0 to 250, a frame step, of course, and the chunk size. And the chunk size is important for the render farm, because what we can adjust as well is the number of machines. So I can say I want 25 machines running on this render, and I don't want the cheap 8 CPU 16 gigabytes one, but I want the 96 CPU with 192 gigabytes of RAM. Of course, it's more expensive, but yeah, it's faster also. And if you are working from home, that might be an alternative. If you have not the best machine or just one machine, you can just send your renders to a render farm like that, and let the data centers of Google do the job. And just to give you a small price point, this scene, and I can tell you that I pimped the look a little bit more for the final rendering, took like 15 minutes per frame, and with 250 frames, that's a lot. So it cost around 37 euros to render this shot, which translates to, let's say, $40. But the cool thing was that 1 hour later, I had the finished renderings on my machine downloaded, and I could use them. I was able to use them in compositing. Okay, so now I think I'm finished with the Cinema 4D part. I will switch to After Effects. And do you have some questions?
Can I ask you a quick question whilst you're doing that, Jonas?
Yes.
We had a question from Celio about the version for Cinema 4D in which Google Sync was released. Do you happen to know that?
I think it was 19. but it could also be that it was 18. Not exactly sure about that.
Got it. Okay, no worries. We'll look into it, Celia.
I think it was 18. I think it was 18. Yeah, not exactly. Yeah. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is to set up the whole thing in compositing. We've got a lot to tweak here, and I already prepared the scene, and here we've got the finished rendering. And here you can also see a little bit of depth of field with on this one, for example, and also on this piece. It's not as obvious as in my render settings, but it's there. And here we've got the matte pass, and outside faces are red, inside faces are green, and we will use the inside faces later to add some glow. Okay, but first let's add a new composition, and I will do that by dragging and dropping the limits PNG sequence to the new composition icon here. One thing I forgot in Cinema 4D, and that's very important, in the render settings. If you go to save, I used PNG as the format, as you already saw. One thing that is very important is once you check alpha channel here, always check straight alpha as well, because this will create the much better alpha, because you will get rid of the gray seams, so you don't have to use a choker effect later. You can just use it as is. That's very important. So let's jump back to After Effects, and yeah, let's set this whole thing up. And the first thing I want to set up is these small pieces of rock that I showed you here in this sequence. So there are a few pieces of rock that just add some extra detail, and extra detail is always good because it helps selling a shot. So let's add that by using particular, and therefore I'm going to create a new solid and call it rocks. Hit OK, and here I have my rocks layer. And then I'm going to use FX Console from Video Copilot, and I'm going to bring that up by pressing Shift and Space. And then I'm going to type in part for particular, hit Enter, and it will automatically be applied. And as you can see, we already got particles in the scene. Of course, it's not finished like that. So I'm going to go to the designer and tweak all of the settings here to my liking. So first of all, we're going to adjust the emitter type. I want to change it from point to box. Then I want to have less particles per second. Let's bring them down to 4. I also want the emitter size not to be XYZ linked, but XYZ individual. And then I'm going to type in 10 for X, 300 for Y, and let's say 50 for Z direction. That's cool. Next thing I want to do is go to the motion tab, and I'm going to bring down the velocity to something like 20. That's good. And then I'm going to go to the particle type, and this is a very important one because I don't want these little spheres here. I want little pieces of rock. So I'm going to change the particle type to sprite. And then I'm going to choose a sprite from the sprites menu here. There are a lot of sprites that you can use. In the dust and debris section, there are 3 very cool ones because they don't have a dramatic lighting applied to them. So these are lit very dramatically, but of course, once they start spinning, you actually have to adjust the lighting, and you can do that better by using these 3 here. So I'm going to use Rock Tumble 1 and hit OK. And I'm also going to increase the particle life and start and adjust the time sampling to be started birth loop. And that's it for this section. Now I go to size and rotation, and I'm going to bring up the size so we can see what we're doing actually. So these are our rock pieces. Of course, it's always good to introduce some randomness because randomness helps selling shots. It just looks more natural. And I also don't want them to just pop up here, but I want them to be scaled up very fast. And I'm going to use this mode here. I'm going to bring down the size in the beginning and then use the second knot here and bring it to the left. And this way you can see that they are scaling up, but well, it's not too obvious. They are somehow there, but it's not disturbing because they don't just pop up. And the last thing I want to do in this section is random rotation, bringing up to 100. Okay, we don't need opacity, we don't need color. The next thing we need is physics. And it's already set to air, which is good because we just want to add some wind. Let's bring up the wind to, well, something like a little bit more than 100. And also we want to add a turbulence field, or we want to affect position by the turbulence field here. Also to add a more, well, natural behavior. Okay, let's go back to size and rotation and let's bring down the size a little bit. And the next thing I want to do is I also want to add some more pieces of rock, some more sprites, because that also adds an extra layer of randomness, and therefore it looks more natural, as I already said. What I will do to do that is I want to create another system here. And now I've got system 2. And the cool thing about the particular systems here is that they will inherit everything from the master system once you delete these these things here. These, I don't know what they are called, buckets. No. Simon, help me. No? Okay. So, however, this system.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry, sorry, Jonas.
Or what are these tiles here called? Are they just called tiles?
They're blocks.
Blocks. They are called blocks. All right. So, yeah, every single block will be inherited from the master system, except for those that you have on this system. So I deleted everything here in system 2, except for motion and particle type. And in motion, I will just modify the velocity and the velocity randomness. And in particle type, which is actually the more important one, I will again set the particle type to sprite, but I will choose another sprite. This time I'm going to use rock tumble 2 and hit OK. I will again set live to 10 seconds. And oops, I just exacted my changes, although I wasn't ready yet. And I'm going to adjust the time sampling to start at birth loop. Good, that's basically it. And now I've got 2 different pieces of rocks. And once I, for example, go to the master system and adjust the size, all of the rocks will be affected in size. And this is very handy. So I will bring this down to a size of 10 and hit apply. And now this is looking good, but I also want to animate the emitter. And I want to start emitting at this point in time. So I will just move this this track to the right so that it starts later. And now I'm going to the emitter settings here. And what I want to do is I'm going to bring the position to the left here so that the emitter is right above the L in the beginning. Then I'm going to set a keyframe, and I'm going to go to 7 seconds here and bring the particle emitter all the way to the right. Okay, and now if I hit play, you can see that it already looks quite good. Of course, there's some room for improvement because in the end, we've got too many of the small ones. So what I want to do is I want to go to the wind parameters in the physics section. Here we've got the wind X, and I'm going to set a keyframe. And here at second 4, I'm going to increase the amount of wind to something like this. And now let's scrub through the timeline. Yeah, that's looking good. So we've got a little bit of debris here and a little bit of debris here. Perfect. Right. So the next thing I want to do, I want to show you here on this frame, and I'm going to zoom in. We've got a lot of pieces here, a lot of little rocks, and you can set an obscuration layer so that some of the rocks are in front of the text layer and some of them are behind. And the first thing you need to do in order to achieve that is set the limits or the text animation, the PNG sequence, to a 3D layer, to be a 3D layer. And then we go back to the rocks layer, go to the visibility settings of Particula, and here we can set an obscuration layer, and we will use the limits PNG sequence. And now let's have a look at the rocks, and some of them will disappear. Well, they won't really disappear, but they will be behind the whole thing. So they will reappear. Let's try to find one that is behind the whole thing. Yeah, this one here. Have a look at this one here. This will be hidden behind the text now. And the big one as well. Okay, the next thing that I told you is I want to add some 3D look here because they are very flat. There is no real lighting going on, and I want to add a light direction. And I'm going to use layer styles for that. So I'm going to right-click on the rocks, and I'm going to add 2 different layer styles. The first one is going to be inner shadow, and let's just rotate the shadow here so that it appears in the lower right, and the distance is 5. That's okay. And I'm also gonna tint this blue and adjust the blending mode to be color burn, which will burn out everything dramatically. But once I bring down the opacity, you can see that there is some more, well, there is still some detail going on, more than if I would just multiply this. Okay, then I'm going to use another layer style, which is going to be bevel and emboss. And the reason why I'm using 2 layer styles instead of just this one here is that I want to have different sizes for the shadow areas and for the light areas. So what I will do here is I'm going to reduce the shadow opacity to 0, and I'm going to reduce the size to 3, and then I'm going to tint the lighting here towards orange, of course, and set it up to be color dodge. Maybe it's tinted a little bit too much, but I will work with something like that. And now we can make a comparison. So this is very flat and this is way better. So now we added some light direction to the pieces here. Okay. Oh, we are almost at the end. I still got lots of stuff to do. First, I'm gonna add a background, but actually the timing is pretty much as in the previous session. So let me create a new solid here, and this is gonna be the background. And I'm gonna add a ramp. This should be a radial ramp. I'm gonna swap the colors, and the light color should be something bluish but very dark, something like that. Let's hit OK. Bring this point here to the center and this one to the outside. Well, it's a little bit too much. Let's do it like that. And then I want to break up the edges here a little bit with some lens flares, because if we place that in the very back, well, it's a little bit boring. So I want to add some lens flares here and there, and in order to be flexible in the end, I want to do that by using light sources. So I'm going to create 2 light sources. This is going to be my first one, and I'm going to place that one up here. And then I'm going to create a copy of that by doing Command D or pressing Control D on PC. And I'm going to place the 2 lights here and there. And of course, because this is a 3D layer, I need to tell it that it doesn't need to accept shadows and lights. All right, and now I can add another solid. And I will do that by right-clicking, and I will call this flares. And here I will add some null light factory. Okay, so here we've got a lens flare. Lens flares are always good. People love lens flares. And I'm also go to the designer here and go to the presets, and I'm going to use this one here because I like it very much. And I also think that there is a little bit too much going on, like these stripes here. So I will get rid of them. And here we've got the lens flare editor, and we just need to hide all of these stripes here. And then this does the job. We can hit OK. So we made a custom lens flare here, and I'm going to tell it to use the lights like so, which is perfect. Okay, and then I'm going to add a tint to tint all of this towards green, just like that. Of course, that's a little bit too much, but I'm going to add this to the composition or to the background, and then I'm going to bring down the opacity to something like this, so that it's there, but it's not that obvious that we're talking about lens flares here. It just adds some extra detail to the background. Okay, good. So the next thing I want to do is to add some glow here, and this is actually the point where I want to use this matte here. Bear with me, I'm a little bit overdoing in terms of time. Give me another 5 minutes.
You're fine. Well, there's we can probably squeeze in another couple of minutes. And we thank you for bearing with us, everyone. We're slightly going over. The whole thing is that we got so many fantastic things to show you that we're trying to cram them into an hour. So yes, take up another couple of minutes, please, Jonas.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to use this limits matte here, and as you can see, it's red and green. And now I'm going to show you how you can extract a luma matte out of this, a luma matte for the inside faces here. And I will do that by going to the effect controls here and right-clicking, and I'm going to go to channel, set channels. And set channels is pretty cool because you can set the source for each color, for red, green, and blue, and override it with another color. So everything you need to do is to override all of the colors here with green. And this will bring up, yeah, the Luma mat. So here we've got the Luma mat, and now we can add some Trapcode shine, for example. So let's add some shine. Here we go. That's already pretty nice, but I want to colorize the whole thing differently. So with the midtones, I use some green, and for the shadows, I'm gonna use some blue. Well, actually, that should also be greenish. Right, but that looks quite good. I want to reduce the ray length, of course, and I also want to bring down the source opacity to 0. And what I'm going to do then is animating the whole effect, or the center point, the source point. And I will bring the source point here to the left, to something like that. Then I'm going to set a keyframe, and somewhere around here, I'm going to bring this to that side here. And this sets another keyframe for me. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity and just add it very slightly, just like that. Maybe we can also set it to add. Yep. And we could do the very same thing with optical glow, for example. So I could just duplicate the layer, just get rid of one, or make one invisible, delete the shine layer, and instead I'm going to use some optical glow. Of course, I have to bring up the opacity to see what's going on. And I'm going to adjust the inner tint to something bluish, and the outer tint to something greenish. Yeah, then maybe adjust the size a little bit. I think the amount is, yeah, the amount is actually good. Everything I need to do now is to bring down the opacity to something like that. And now let's enable the shine layer again. And that's basically it. So the last thing I would do normally is to add some color correction here. So add some curves. And I always love bringing the midtones down a little bit. And then I'm also gonna add something that is very 90s, which is a drop shadow. But I'm gonna do this because of I want to add some, I want to add some extra depth to the shot. I'm gonna do this as follows. I'm gonna increase the distance, and then I will blur this out like so, and it's very, it's very good. It's very 3D-ish. Hey, honey. She's back. She woke up. She doesn't sleep.
That wasn't a long sleep, was it?
Yeah, so that's it. That's it. And yeah, do you have any questions?
Fantastic. I've been making notes all as we go along here. I love what you're doing in terms of just like small little bits that you're reminding us, like the secondary system in particular for adding the dust and the debris, and how that automatically can take on a number of particles per second, so you don't have to keep having multiple layers and so on. And lovely tricks with the layer styles as well. That's a really nice way of saving time.
Yeah, it really is.
So it's just checking out the question. Oh, yes, questions in the comments. They're just echoing the same thing. Thanks, Marius. Lots of really neat tricks. And he's saying thanks for your tips, Jonas, on the University. They're also amazing.
Thank you for
so yes, thank you again.
Really
there's more. We put in the links, or Darren put in the links to more of your tutorials. And also I'll be adding those links into the email that gets sent out to everyone automatically, plus the download link for this particular project, the After Effects and the Cinema project, so that you can have a play around and have a look to see how it's put together. It's interesting, isn't it? Is there a rule about having to do everything perfectly in 3D, or can we fake it? And I like the way how you kind of blend those things so we can get more iterations out of a project.
Yeah, I think it's always important not to go the 100% way inside of 3D, because you always know that the last 10% take like 90% of the time, and there is so many things that you can do in compositing to make a rendering look better. And if you are already at 80 to 90%, that's actually enough, because the rest can be done in compositing. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the emergency effect is always a lens flare.
That's right.
That helps always.
If you don't think what's bad, quickly put one over the top. Hide that seam. Absolutely. Brilliant. And thanks everyone. Thanks Elio, Scott, Richard, Mark for those comments. A quick question from Stephen about eGPU and on a Radeon card on Mac. What would you say about that if you're working with Cinema, Jonas, and you had an extra eGPU?
Well, the thing about AMD cards in general, I'm a big fan of eGPUs, because I'm working with my MacBook Pro pretty much all day long. I've got a workstation, but I definitely use the MacBook Pro more frequently because I'm on the road pretty often. So yeah, but I got an eGPU as well on my desk, and it helps a lot for GPU rendering, of course. The thing with an AMD card in the eGPU is that you can currently use it with ProRender only. With ProRender, it works perfectly, and ProRender is integrated in Cinema 4D. If you want to use Redshift, for example, yeah, it doesn't work with AMD cards yet. We are actually currently working on a version for Metal, and this will support AMD cards. But up to now, Redshift, for example, only works on NVIDIA hardware. One thing that I forgot to mention one thing that I forgot to mention about Google Sync is that it already works with Redshift. So Redshift is supported. You can set up your scenes with Redshift, just send them to Google Sync and it will render them.
Even if you're on a Mac, and they can render them on their operating system independently.
Yeah.
Nice. That's good. Great. Okay. The last question, because we've really seriously overran this one, but thank you for coming along for the ride with us. Question from Eli. Oh no, it was from Celio. Sorry, Eli, it was a comment. You had the same question. Thank you. Celio just wanted to ask about the rig that you've got. I was just going to add in that I've got 3 eGPUs. I've got 2 Sonnets, a Sonnet and a Sonnet one with a chassis, and I've got the Blackmagic one. But you've got a different setup at home to work, don't you, Jonas?
Well, at home, I have the MacBook Pro only. I don't have an eGPU here. It's just the MacBook Pro, and whenever I need to render something bigger, I go the Sync way, the Google Sync way.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good stuff. Jonas, would you mind sharing your screen back to me? Because I just wanted to remind everyone of the links to the recording, and also if you've got any follow-up questions.
Well, right now the RAM preview was finished, so let's have a look one time again.
All right. Okay.
One last time, and then I switch over.
Lovely.
Okay, that's it.
I like the glows and the shine in there as well.
Now I'm gonna switch back to you. Here you go.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Great. And I was just going to share the same thing I said at the beginning. So if you missed it, with the PDF downlink, there's a PDF inside the handout section, which has the links to all the recordings for all the sessions this week. So including the recordings of the ones that we haven't recorded yet. So that's like a metaphysical dilemma for you. But if you go into that PDF and you click on the registration, say for tomorrow, then you'll get to watch it. But also, if by registering it, you get the link sent to you automatically for the recording. And also afterwards, if you hadn't registered, you can still go to these links and then you can access the recording after time. So please feel free to download this PDF. And also right at the bottom of the PDF, under all the fantastic stuff that Jonas does, there's a link to the email for follow-up information. So if you've got any questions for me or for Jonas, please email us, simon@redjart.com, and I will follow up with you. But just to reiterate, you'll get the recording for this automatically, and then that link, that email, will also have a link to all the things that Jonas mentioned, and also to the project files that he's been working on. So thank you again, Jonas. It's always fascinating to watch one of your sessions, but I love when you kind of break small things down and it's like an insight into your creative process. So thanks for doing this again this week.
Yeah, welcome.
And thanks also to Darren for answering the questions and helping us out on the technical side as well. We appreciate that too. And thank you everyone for joining us. We know that time is a valuable resource and that it's all a little bit, it's a little bit complicated now for all our workflows and where we're working from and so on. So thanks for spending this time with us, and thanks for indulging us for going over a few minutes. And hopefully we'll see you on some of the other sessions this week. All right. And thanks for all the kind comments as well. We really appreciate it. But in any case, we'll see you on the next one. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.